Joining a professional body has never been more important. Join thousands of other professionals just like you who are getting ahead with CIHT membership. Go to the CIHT website and discover exclusive resources and why the leaders and future leaders of the sector are members with CIHT. Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
Hello everyone and welcome to the CIHT podcast, paving the way to future-proofing our infrastructure. Today's episode features Stuart Guthrie from Sweco, Mark Batcheldor from Hampshire County Council and Stuart Gready from OCL Regeneration. Today's episode will look at how circular thinking can both change the way we look at and improve the way we maintain and design our assets, and how we can utilise recycled materials to reduce cost, time and tackle climate action.
Hi, I'm Stuart Guthrie. I'm a technical director at Sweco in the Edinburgh office, and I work for the pavements division. So my job is primarily looking into designing road pavements, etc., and things like that. So I work on a number of projects throughout the UK, mainly for national highways, but also look at local authority works as well, and other smaller suppliers and any interested groups as well.
I'm Mark Batcheldor. I work for Hampshire County Council. I work in the plan maintenance team as well as the asset management team. We're looking at obviously recycled materials as being a way forward for ourselves, and that is one of the other duties I do, as well as design checks, etc., utilising developers and trying to get them to be encouraged to use recycled materials as well.
I'm Stuart Gready, MD of OCL Regeneration. We work mainly around helping local authorities and tier 1 contractors to come up with circular solutions to the recycling of typical network wastes, focusing mainly on low carbon products. We have a combination of our own depots and partner depots where we're taking in those wastes from the highway and getting them back out as apt products onto the network.
So we first met Mark we're working for National Highways on the M27 Junction 8 project. So this is an upgrade of a junction for National Highways. But some of the works also moved into Hampshire County Council's area as well. So there was some extra works on a roundabout and part of a dual carriageway that joined up to the junction 8 of the M27. There became a point in the discussions where there was a possibility of extra funding became available to look at better treatments of the roundabout and also the Hampshire County Council network. So we immediately started a discussion with Mark, and it came up during that discussion that there was a possibility that we could use recycled asphalt and recycled materials within that project, which we found really interesting. And this sparked a conversation between us, really. We had a meeting afterwards, which was only supposed to be an hour, but ran on for nearly 2 hours discussing the various ins and outs of using this material, because I'm keen to use recycled materials wherever possible. I've worked using other techniques like crack and seat and rubberization on other projects which use the materials in situ, again on concrete roads, but then also looking at recycling asphalt planings either ex situ or in situ is now coming to the forefront. Yes, over to you, Mark.
Yeah, obviously we had the discussions initially because obviously you were doing proposed works on Hampshire Network. We are at the present time looking and developing our techniques on where we can use recycled materials. We've got a very good client that gives us the opportunity to do that. And it really all started, as far as we were concerned, with reference to recycled materials, going back to 2014, where we identified that we had a tar-bound problem on our road network. As a result of this, we had to address this concern, and we didn't want to just dispose of all tar-bound materials. So we started looking at recycled products and what we could actually do with the tar-bound material. The easiest way of doing with that, we had negotiations with the EA, and the easiest way for us to do this was by putting it into a bound product. So really, since 2014, we've been developing and getting up a history of where we can use it, the best possible locations for using it. And more recently, with our term maintenance contractor Milestones, we've gone in with OCL and we developed a setup up at Mitcheldever where we can now manufacture recycled products utilising our tar-bound material. Obviously, we want to progress this and utilise other materials as well that are non-hazardous. At the end of the day, we're looking at all of our assets that we've got and where we can actually try and reutilise existing materials. So really, that's where we are with it at the moment, is that we are progressing. We have got quite a few of our road network now where we've used materials. We've got quite a bit of experience on locations on where you can use these materials, and this is where we wanted to therefore then look at, on this particular case on an M27 Junction 8, is quite our Windover roundabout there is quite a stressful site, and we were just basically putting it out to everybody to say, can we utilise our sort of recycled materials on the binder courses in any of these areas, or even if it's not the binder courses, it could well be in the base materials, because that's another product that we try and utilise as recycled at the same time. So really, that's where the discussions initially came from.
This issue with tar bound is probably one of the key issues for local authorities. A lot of local authorities avoid it because there is a potential that if this material isn't treated correctly, or when it's actually removed, removing it to waste can be prohibitively expensive, costing hundreds of pounds per tonne to remove this tar bound material to specialist waste, either in the UK, or I've actually heard of it going abroad as well. And so this is a great way of reusing this material. It's a resource, it's an untapped resource, really.
Basically 3 goals that we developed when we were looking at Mitchell Dever and developing the site purely for recycling. The whole success of this was going to be based on utilising and maximising sustainable low carbon materials to give us a net reduction in our virgin aggregates, to remove the need for disposal of the tar-bound materials, which we've already mentioned, and a significant reduction in the number of miles travelled for material supplies. So we're not drawing in virgin materials. We've already got the materials from our own network that we could therefore then reutilise. And there's obviously carbon savings from this. Obviously in December 2020, we will set ourselves some targets, some net zero targets. And this was one of the goals that we actually had in setting ourselves for carbon reduction. And that's why we went into this partnership with Milestones and OCL to develop this, and obviously other products as we go along further, to actually therefore then achieve these targets that we'd set ourselves within the county.
I think the key point here, let's talk the drivers that Mark's already touched on. So we've got the avoidance of the cost of the disposal that Stuart raised, and Mark and I work closely together, valorising these products to get them as far as we can up the value chain. So that was the opportunity. The actual doing of it then, we worked closely. We were very lucky to have the support of Hampshire County Council, who committed to the development of a bespoke flagship depot. So we've been really lucky that we've had a blank canvas to start from. And we operate other depots around the country. And that circular piece is all about identifying the waste, classifying it properly so that we're dealing with the duty of care, then bringing it into the depot, and through the quality plan then producing the cold base and binders and HBMs, which we use in other assets as well. So that is simply bringing it in to what we call the reception bay and manning that compliance piece, crushing and screening it, approving the grading to the national standards, in this case clause 948 and BS 9228, and then putting them through the mixer module on a daily basis to make sure these are available to maximise the opportunities. We have a contracting arm as well, and we have other depots which are a bit more ephemeral, they're a bit more come and go, but the commitment needs to be that to get the progress and to make these materials available, they have to be produced daily, because otherwise it's like a chicken and egg scenario where a scheme might be identified, but if you haven't got the resource in place to do it, you've missed that opportunity. So the commitment of the partnership was to work collaboratively on costs, on risk, on programming, on delivery, all of those pieces, all synchronized so that waste comes in and waste goes back out on a daily basis. And I think that was the most significant thing that we achieved together. That is a brilliant question. What we always stress when we host visits and when we try and promote this exemplar example is that it doesn't need to be all singing, all dancing. So you can vary the offering depending on throughputs, depending on appetite. And so you don't need a vast depot. The kit's all mobile. You can run in with a few years of campaign, what we call campaign work, where together we identify the donor site and the recipient site, and then we mobilize to a site as a kind of soft start. You don't need, we've been very lucky with this flagship depot, but you literally don't need that. You can target smaller campaigns and still achieve the same outcome.
We were lucky enough that we've got a client that actually looked at this and developed the Mitchell Dever project from the depot that was there, because it used to be just an old asphalt plant that we had there, and we've completely reconstructed it so it is up to EA standards, and therefore then it gave the opportunity for both Milestone and OCL to operate out of this depot, knowing exactly what was there. It had the capacities that they required for our recycling targets, and we felt that was the best thing from Hampshire, that we could provide this depot, which again we can use in the future anyway, but we wanted a location, and that's why Mitchell Devil was put it where it was, because it has easy access to some of our major road networks, so we could actually get the materials transported around the county quite easily as well.
You've got to bear in mind that in the 18 months preceding, we recycled 30,000 tonnes of asphalt waste containing coal tar. The lion's share of that from Hampshire's network, some of that from external sources and going back to external jobs. But we saved over 1,000 tonnes of CO2 during that process and saved the disposal of 30,000 tonnes of tar bands.
I think that's an interesting point that Stuart raises there, because us as designers don't initially think of using a recycled product, because that can involve some ECI work and a bit of planning up front, considerable planning up front to find a resource, the source, the plant, the machinery, etc. But now that Hampshire have this in place, it is a viable material that can be used quite quickly, the same as asphalt production. So it's easier to consider in the design process right from the beginning, without all that ECI, etc. and things like that, because everything's in place already. So it's a real advantage for us as designers.
And that's so embedded, Stuart, that the Hampshire are changing the standard details for a lot of the works to to mandate the use of these products. So that is it. That's the success crystallising, that those designers have got a page to flip to that says use this material. And that for me is the cherry on top.
Absolutely. I think from now on, we're being driven more and more now by carbon reduction. So there's targets there's national targets, national highways have set some ambitious targets, and also local authorities have set targets as well for carbon reduction. And this really feeds into our design process. There's asphalt production. For instance, we're working on a number of projects throughout the country, and the asphalt is one of the highest emitters of carbon within the whole project. So it's key that we drive down these carbon emissions using different technologies. So there are other technologies such as warm mix asphalt that is coming to the forefront now. In fact, it's standard within national highways to use warm mix asphalt. But now if we can tap into recycled asphalt mixes, this is going to reduce the carbon even more and help these authorities or national bodies reduce their carbon emissions overall. So yes, it's really helpful for designers to actually look into this new products, recycled materials. They've been in the standards for many years, but not many people are actually using them at the moment. But now we can tap into this. It's readily available straight from source as we would a normal asphalt mix. So we can really engage and use these products.
Well, there's health and safety risks which are reduced significantly, because obviously if you're laying hot material, the last thing you want is members of the public coming anywhere near it whilst it's being laid. A lot of these materials now, these recycled, are all cold materials, so there's less risk in that. So in the actual just laying process, to ensure that you don't get the general public mixing up with or getting into and giving access to them via their vehicular accesses or their pedestrian accesses into their properties. In the long term, yes, the material will be very similar to that of an asphalt or a bitumen macadam type material. But at the end of the day, the general public won't necessarily see this because it's in the lower layers at the present time. Obviously, there are progressions now in looking at surface courses with recycled materials, but that's all in development stages at the present time. But at the end of the day, the general public will not necessarily see the benefits of this, apart from that there are carbon savings from it. But the actual laying process of it, as I say, it's all cold, so it's a lot easier. It's less damaging to the workers that are actually laying it, because obviously they're not dealing with heated products as such. It's all cold lay, so it has benefits right the way through. But one of our biggest benefits that we find from using recycled materials is if we're using our own natural aggregates from the tar-bound materials, if that material has been taken to Mitchell Dever, they will therefore then collect from that same depot that material, which will therefore then be put on the footpaths or the roads, etc. So there's a big carbon saving in the number of vehicles that you're utilising in both disposing of the material to the Mitchell Dever depot, but likewise then for the delivery of the material to the site, because it's the same lorry that could be utilised.
There are some outright programme benefits as well. Self-delivery as a model, Hampshire, for instance, but lots of other counties are quite distal from asphalt plants. So by having a locally secured source, it leads to less disruption on the network, which is a nice piece for the communities. Programme-wise as well, outputs are increased because it's a plant which is there at the beck and call of the county and any other local contractors. They can get much higher outputs from our plant rather than At the moment, with austerity looming potentially again, or certainly some cuts with plants, sometimes in this country you find yourself a long way from an asphalt plant and they can't deliver the outputs you need. So a big scheme might need 500, 600, 700 tonnes of base in a day, and those numbers are very hard to hit nowadays. Whereas if you've got a plant nearby, you can hit those numbers. So programs are being shortened.
Yeah, I think we're hearing more and more about local authorities sourcing local materials and actually taking this recycling on board themselves. I know we're working with a number of local authorities in Scotland that are looking at different ways of using local recycled asphalt planings, and I've heard of ground up tyres as well being used in rubberised type surface courses for footways, etc. But they've gone local with it, so they're communicating with local companies within their local authorities to get that source of material to cut down on the distance travelled for these materials. So it is a very local community-based business now, and it's really starting to gain traction now.
I think that's a good point, Stuart, because at the end of the day, Hampshire have got a tar-bound problem, so therefore then we're dealing with a lot of our materials, and our recycled materials are based around tar-bound materials. Yeah. But you may well find in Scotland that they want to recycle different products, and as a result of that's where you come with different recycled type products. We use at the moment the cement-bound granular materials using clause 821, 822, and we use the cold recycled bound materials with the clause 948 because that suits our needs. It's our recycled products that we could therefore then use within our network. We don't have slag and we don't have the other materials that you could come up with reference to an HBM. We don't necessarily want to go down those lines. We're looking for materials and what we can recycle with basically what we've got within our own network.
And it's probably true to say, though, that this isn't common across all local authorities either, is it, Mark? There's quite different approaches in different authorities.
Yeah, different authorities will have different thought processes on what they can use and what they can't use. Different authorities will have different budgets. We're quite lucky in Hampshire in that we're looking to progress with this and utilising recycled products, but you may well find that there are other authorities that just don't have not so much the expertise, but they don't to actually change things unless there is actually a driver to doing it. And it may well be that these zero carbon initiatives will be the driver that they need to therefore then encourage their councillors and their political arms to actually therefore then drive the use of recycled materials.
And let's talk about behaviour change for a second. We are a country that has been led predominantly by quarrying companies and the hot asphalt plants, and it's not been lost on us that recycling and low carbon products have got on better elsewhere than they have in the UK, but that is changing, and that's what's really important. Stuart, you're bang on. The scarcity of these plants and these resources is probably the single biggest limiting factor. And it's the market itself that has stifled that, because we are, no matter what we say, we're slightly behind the curve on recycling compared to the mainland or other countries. But we are seeing a big acceleration. So when we talk about behaviour change, it's about committing to that metal, those bits of kit and those talented guys to actually make a commercial model work. And then we hope to see them pop up all over the place so that they're more accessible for both local authorities and for the standard surfacing market.
Absolutely. I was looking at some figures earlier in the week, and throughout Europe there's about 50% recycling of asphalt planing. So that's not necessarily tar-bound planings, that's asphalt planing in total. But looking at the US, 86% of asphalt planings are recycled back into mixes again. So we're quite a way behind the rest of the world in doing this, or the US in doing this. So they have a big program of pushing recycled materials and recycling them back into their existing roads. So yeah, we've got a long way to go, but we are starting to see this is actually starting to develop quite well now. And we're starting to see more and more projects going ahead where either in situ or ex situ recycling is used on road. So I suppose most materials either end up in a tip, or in some cases they're downcycled into bases or foundation materials in roads. So asphalt planings are 100% recyclable, not the tar-bound ones. The tar-bound ones have certain environmental issues that we have to be aware of, but asphalt planings are 100% recyclable. Up until recently, there's been a cap on the amount of recycled material that can go into asphalt mixes, but I know that National Highways and other authorities are looking at upping that amount of recycled planings they can use in asphalt mixes, but it's set at around about 20-25%. But the material that Mark actually uses, 80 or 90% wrap, is it, Mark?
Yeah.
Or Stuart?
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's almost a completely recycled asphalt that goes into that. There is small amounts of virgin aggregate put in there just to tweak the blends and the mixes. And then there's a small amount of either cement added or other pozzolanic materials such as PFAs, etc., and things like that. And then there's also this material called foam bitumen. So it's a slightly different methodology for mixing, where hot bitumen is actually injected with water and turns into a steam and expands in the mixing process. And this helps coating the material. It has a higher surface area and therefore coats the recycled material quite well. So that's the technology that's currently employed. We're using wrap mixes, and up to 90% wrap can be used in those. So you've almost got a source yourself when you're a local authority material in a complete circular linear quarry almost, where you can take it from sites and then reuse it again immediately on other sites.
And there's basically no reason why we shouldn't be doing or recycling these materials.
Yeah, the standards exist. I think one of the biggest misperceptions is that it's actually of not as good quality as virgin asphalt. However, believe it or not, the standards actually make it so that it has to be better than standard asphalt quicker, which is, I know, sounds odd. There are certain technical requirements that mean you have to test it at source, and it has to hit quite a high stiffness modulus. So asphalt mixes and the durability of asphalt mixes is connected to stiffness. Now, usually with asphalt mixes, they gain that stiffness over time, and it can take many years to achieve that stiffness, probably 5 or 10 years. But comparable stiffnesses of recycled materials actually have to hit that stiffness value more or less on day one, when in an asphalt mix, it takes many years to achieve it. And then they undergo testing afterwards. For instance, in Scotland, there's a protocol that they actually use FWD and lightweight deflectometers as well to test asphalt mixes when they're actually the recycled asphalt mixes, when they place them on site, so that they can assess the quality of the materials as they go on site. And then they have to come back in 270 days as well. So there is a performance criteria, which is, again, above asphalt mixes. I think the biggest problem is a perception that they are actually worse. They're not as good as virgin aggregate asphalt mixes, and that is a misconception. I think it's fair to say that probably some of these materials that succumb to the high temperatures probably didn't use some of the technology that we use today in asphalt mixes. Obviously, there are countries that are much, much hotter than us and still have successful asphalt pavements, and they adopt technologies of using polymers, etc., to extend the workability of their materials. And that technology, I don't see why that can't be applied to using in recycled mixes as well. So that's where the resilience of these materials to higher temperatures is going to come in, with modifications to the binders, the mixtures, and the technology. So I think going forward, we can plan for these higher temperatures, even with recycled materials in mind.
They can be used across the whole spectrum. There should be no reason why, with the new BSs that have come out with reference to both cement bound and also cold recycled, with the BS 9227 and 9228, they have it within those. They have not only the specifications but laying guides as well. So the materials, you can't necessarily turn around and say you can't use recycled materials anywhere. They can be used anywhere, although there are a few limitations on where, for example, we would be looking to use them. So we wouldn't be looking to use them on known sites, which are, for example, going to be waterlogged for large percentages of the year. You've got to be a bit of care and guidance on where you utilise them. But yes, in general, for most counties, there should be no reasons why you cannot use recycled materials to that. Although we do know that it's cheaper for us to produce a cold recycled material, with reference to how much that is at the moment. As I say, prices are changing on a daily basis at the moment with the oil prices, etc., etc. So we do find that it is difficult to get those sort of figures at the present time until the market starts steadying out again. But we do know that using recycled materials is a cheaper option for us. We're paying less per tonne for a recycled product than we would be for just a standard asphalt.
I think the one important point there, when we talk about the commodities that are used in the manufacture, the simple fact is that these recycled products are less reliant on energy, on bitumen, on cement, on aggregate. So that, combined with the fact that they're less dense, so they go further, it adds up to a basic, cheaper cost of installation. And more importantly, protection from ongoing volatility. So I think we'd all agree the world's crazy volatile place at the moment. Using less energy and using less bitumen, for instance, is a good way of protecting your procurement.
It also provides other opportunities. For instance, I looked at a particular site that was quite remote. It was going to take many hours for the asphalt materials to reach site, probably in the region of about 3 or 4 hours, which could present some problems for the durability of conventional asphalts. They're hot materials, they have to go into insulated lorries, so that time travelling, they're losing temperature all the time. We looked at a particular site of doing a linear quarry process where the material will be taken from site planed, taken to a recycling plant where it would be turned into what was called a slow viscoelastic material. So there's two types of recycled, a fast and a slow viscoelastic. Then returned to site and stockpiled. It could be left there for a few days. As long as it was covered and well looked after, it could be left there for a few days. And then when there was sufficient material, it could actually be put straight back into the same road. So that gave us the opportunity to use a cold material that wasn't prone to any of the drawbacks of using hot materials over long distances. So that's another potential use of these mixes.
There are companies out there that actually do in situ, isn't there, as well? Because there are standards to allow you to do in situ. Yeah. You know, what we're talking about mostly here is ex situ. So we're taking materials from the site, having them mixed in an external location and then brought back to the site. But as I say, there are ways, if you've got rural road networks and you want an in situ process, you know, there are companies out there that will actually come along, they'll plane up the road, and right behind them they'll start relaying it again. That's just utilising the aggregates they've got with a bit of extra materials, whether that be the cements, the PFAs, the limes, whatever they're going to be putting in with it, so that they can come up with design standards for local authorities to actually do it all in situ.
Absolutely. The circular economy is becoming more and more important to designers every day. So this really fits in well with our aims in reducing carbons, or helping our clients reduce carbon as well, by offering these materials in their designs, in their roads, and even in their footways. We're working on a project at the moment to enable local groups, local interest groups, etc., to look at footways, etc., in their local area, to map them out in maps, and then provide them with a design guide, depending on who's going to be using those footways, to actually produce a design that a contractor can understand, and enables them to also understand what they can use as far as recycled materials. So we're looking at these foam mix materials. We're looking at other materials such as PFAs and incinerated bottom ash that can be mixed in with other materials. So it provides them with more of a spectrum. Yeah, it is really important that we actually look at our designs and help our clients move towards a zero carbon economy by introducing these materials. In real terms, it is being driven by local authorities and larger authorities, and also the major stakeholders looking at carbon reductions. It is less energy use. Specifically, I would say with local authorities, then if this can actually save them money in carbon, then potentially we could see more maintenance being done with less funds. So there's always this mantra of doing more with less, and this actually provides us with the potential for doing more with less. So yeah, that's definitely something that we're aiming to do with recycled materials. I think what was quite interesting was I did touch on using slow viscoelastics, the slow set materials, and I think you've got experience of that, haven't you, Mark? And that was something I hadn't initially thought about when using slow viscoelastics. They're deferred set materials that take them out. They can be stored for short amounts of time and then used. So they do offer local authorities used to take a lot of deferred set materials for doing patching works and repair works on their networks. And that was using diesels or other deferred set materials in normal asphalt mixes, which could probably sit there for up to 7 days. Slow viscoelastics offer that same, but you had some problems, didn't you, Mark?
Yeah, I did have some problems with some of the slow elastic materials, because what we were finding was it was the care that the contractors were actually having once the material was delivered to sites. There can be issues. The water content of the materials very important with utilising recycled materials. So if you've got a really hot summer's day and a contractor turns up on site and he decides that he just tips it straight on top of the road, which is already warm, you know, that the moisture content starts coming out of that very quickly, and it's very difficult then, because the product was actually designed with a water content. If you therefore then leave it exposed to elements and it either rains on it or it dries out, then it makes it very difficult then for the contractor laying that material again to try and achieve that same moisture content back into the materials. So you can end up with very dry spots, you can end up with very wet spots, and it makes it slightly more difficult, which is why we've come away in Hampshire from utilising that so much. Plus also, we found that some of our contractors were leaving it not just for a couple of days, it was like 7 days, for example, and therefore the material was just drying out because the cement was bonding to the aggregate, and therefore then it couldn't be reused. But one of the good benefits to actually using these recycled materials is if we came to that stage, we were therefore then telling our contractors to take that material back to the depot where it could therefore then be reprocessed. And it's exactly the same as any extra tonnages that we find that we have on site. So say, for example, a contractor over orders by 20 tonnes, that 20 tonnes can go back to the depot and it can be recycled again. So what you've got to bear in mind is that there is no wastage. So where you've got asphalt plants that then have a lorry that they then have to dispose of that material because they've got nowhere else for it to go, they can recycle part of it back into the asphalt plants, but literally 100% of this will come back into the depot for recycling. So that's where the circular economy comes back in again, is that any materials that are left from or cannot be used on the site can therefore be returned back to our Mitchell Dever plant for reprocessing.
For me, the rip up the rule book. We're all here to collaborate on risk and share experiences. What we find a lot of is the old mental copy and paste of specs. So I stand out on jobs quite a lot where people say, if it's not hot, I don't want it. That sort of attitude has to change. We all need to put ourselves under more pressure to accelerate change, and we all know why. I'm not going to go into that. But what we do need to do is give people the confidence through the increased use of the products and through sharing experiences to make sure that the use of them is embedded and that there is none of this, oh, I did it like that 5 years ago, so I'm going to do it like that again. Without change, we're not going to achieve much. So for me, it's having the confidence to change.
Yeah, I think just adding to what Stuart said there actually is share that risk as well. Suppliers, designers, and specifiers as well need to share that risk with these materials. It is fairly new at the moment, and there is still some issues out there, but at the same time, these issues aren't insurmountable. And it's just understanding that if something does go wrong, there's quite quickly somebody might turn around, oh, this has gone wrong, this is a disaster, let's move away from it. But if we take a collaborative approach, Transport Scotland have a really good collaborative approach towards this design, and they work well with their contractors and they work well with their designers, and everybody takes on board that level of risk, and communication happens throughout. So moving forward, it is a big thing. A big discussion needs to take place, and an understanding how to design these materials, how to look at them in case anything goes wrong or anything needs to be taken up, and then also learn from it. Take that information, learn from it, and adapt your specifications.
I think, again, building on that, we mentioned it before, it's the planning, it's the organisation, it's the early contractor involvement, it's all of those things. You need to bring all of those together to therefore then identify the risks, if there are any risks that you foresee, and therefore then you can work collaboratively to actually achieve what you're trying to get as a final product, which is basically construction of a road or a footpath or cycleway that meets the requirements of the specifications. You can have all of that by literally discussing it with your contractors and with your designers and going through it all, which is, as I say, which is what we were going back to the very original, which is why we were initially saying to Sweco with reference to M27 Junction 8, have you considered recycled products as a binder course? That's what we do. We have it now on most of our surfacing schemes. We'll have an ECI on our surfacing schemes, and we will look at, can we use recycled? That's the first priority. And as Stuart Gready was saying, it's now in our standard details. So the first thing that we should be considering is, can we use recycled product?
And it's not always the first thing designers go to either. So that was quite a breath of fresh air for us to hear that approach, that forward-thinking approach to using these materials. I've been looking at these materials for years, and it's really good to see now that they're starting to make their way to the front as first choice, as opposed to a secondary or poor relative to asphalt mixes. I think bodies are taking on board. Transport Scotland, and I know National Highways as well are really looking at recycled materials, and they're starting to build a body of evidence together. I know modifications to the DMRB coming out in the next few years are obviously going to be targeting and moving towards more recycled materials. It can be a bit parochial, though. Is that right to say, Mark? These are often quite localised studies and that don't really get shown throughout the country, unfortunately. But I know of more and more authorities that are doing this. Lincolnshire have a really good programme of recycling asphalt and tar bound planings, and I know there are other counties that are really considering this and moving forward. But there isn't, unfortunately, no centralised area there to look at these successes and case studies, etc. So
I think that also comes down to the design standards. The DMRB is obviously Department of Transport's documentation, and they have a slightly different view to it to what the local councils would have. They don't want to take the risks as necessarily as the local councils can look at that as a risk element, and therefore then say, yes, we can do this and we can't do that because it's our network. We can look at what we want. So that is a very important point, is that, but actually publicising it is, you can go onto any sites now on the internet. Our design standards are up there, our standard details are up there. It all has recycled materials in it. That's our first priority. We look at recycled first, then other options after.
It is changing. So not only National Highways' interest in getting it into the DMRB, but also things like LCRIG. They're a really useful platform. IAT are sharing more and more information on this. So it is out there, but I absolutely agree. It would be fantastic to get it into one forum where everyone could share more efficiently and with more transparency. But I guess it's the old commercial piece. People are sometimes perhaps retaining this information for commercial and contractual reasons and trying to keep an advantage. And I think that needs to change, and it needs to become more of a family name, a generic process that goes on out there in the market. One thing I'd cite as a sign of the green shoots of that happening is that the majors have evolved. The big guys are getting on with warm now, and we're getting benefits from that, and that's increasing recycling. But all those majors now are eyeing the cold piece as well, and they have to react. And when it becomes just an everyday name and an everyday process, that's when we'll be sharing flat out, and there'll be those forums. At the moment, everyone's positioning and jostling, whereas when it becomes accepted, it'll become business as usual.
Yep.
Stuart, thanks very much. That was brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was really useful. I enjoyed that.
Joining a professional body has never been more important. Join thousands of other professionals just like you who are getting ahead with CIHT membership. Go to the CIHT website and discover exclusive resources and why the leaders and future leaders of the sector are members with CIHT.